Alcatraz has hundreds of documented inmate files, but there's one cell that doesn't exist on any blueprint. And the guards who saw it were never the same. Tonight, you'll hear what was recorded inside that missing cell, the one they tried to erase from history. This is one of the strangest cases connected to Alcatraz. A cell that vanished from all official records, yet survivors swore it was real. Tonight's story comes from a former officer who broke silence years later, and what he witnessed still haunts him today. I should have never taken the night shift custodial job on Alcatraz. I only applied because the pay was better than any late-night gig in San Francisco. And honestly, I didn't think the stories about Block D were anything more than tourist bait. Every guide talked about the hole, the solitary cells where prisoners once claimed to hear screams that didn't come from any living inmate. But I figured isolation makes people hear things. When you put a man in total darkness, the mind becomes its own prison. That's what I told myself the night everything changed. My job was simple. Walk the designated sections, check the temperature sensors, and report any water leaks. That's it. Nothing paranormal, nothing dramatic. But around 2:50 a.m., while walking past the museum displays near the old dining hall, my radio snapped with static so loud it made me flinch. Through the crackling, a voice whispered, "D block, cell 5. Now, I froze. No one was supposed to be in D block past midnight, not even staff. And no one used that tone on the radio. It sounded strained, like someone forcing words between clenched teeth. "Copy?" I asked, but the radio went dead. I should have called the ranger team. I should have waited. But something in the voice made my chest tighten, panic, or maybe concern. So I walked. The wind outside battered the windows, howling like something alive. My footsteps echoed across the cold concrete as I approached the corridor leading into Block D, the infamous isolation wing. In the 1,940 seconds, prisoners claimed a creature stalked the corridor at night. One inmate even swore something with glowing eyes crawled into his cell and strangled him. He was found dead the next morning with bruises around his neck that didn't match his own hands. Even the guards refused to do rounds alone. I never believed any of that until the iron door to Block D slid open by itself before I even touched it. The hinges screamed like metal in pain. I stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged. The hall lights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. As I moved deeper, the silence changed. It wasn't empty silence anymore, it was full, humming, like something vibrating under the surface of the building. Then I heard it, a faint scream. Not distant, not echoing. It sounded like it came from inside the walls. My heart thudded in my throat as I forced myself towards cell 5. Everything in my body rejected the idea of going there. The stories about cell 5 were the worst, about a prisoner in the 1,930 seconds who begged the guards not to lock him inside because the man in the dark won't stop screaming. They ignored him. The next morning, they found him with his ribs crushed inward like something had hugged him too tightly. His face frozen in a silent, permanent scream. I reached the cell. The door was open, just wide enough for someone to slip inside. A cold gust pushed past me, dragging the faint smell of seawater and rot. I raised my flashlight, sweeping the interior. It was empty. Just a concrete slab, graffiti, and old rust stains. But the moment my foot crossed the threshold. My flashlight flickered violently, and then the screaming started again, this time right next to my ear. I jumped back, slamming into the opposite wall, my heart exploding in panic. The scream wasn't human. It was layered like several voices screaming through each other, distorted and stretched. I bolted down the hallway, but the lights above me started shutting off one by one, chasing me with a wave of darkness. I smacked my radio. "Control, I need backup in D block. Something's wrong, something." A voice cut me off. Not the ranger. Not anyone I recognized. "Why are you running?" The whisper followed me like breath on my neck. I sprinted harder, but when I reached the end of the corridor, the door I'd entered from was gone. Literally gone, just solid concrete where it should have been. My pulse thrashed under my skin. I turned, pressing my back to the cold wall. The hallway stretched longer than before, twice as long. Then 4 times as long, as if the block was stretching itself, pulling me deeper into its guts. Slowly, the cell doors began to open, one after another, each with a metallic groan that sounded too much like pain. Something stepped out of cell 9, a shape, human-sized but wrong in posture. Shoulders too narrow, neck too long, head tilted like it was listening to something behind me. My flashlight stuttered, casting fragments of light that barely outlined the figure. Its skin looked pale and loose, like it didn't belong on the bones underneath. And its eyes, God, its eyes shone faintly, like dying embers. "Cell 5. It rasped, voice dry and cracking. "Count incomplete." I stumbled backward. "Stay the hell away from me." The thing twitched at the sound, jerking like a glitching video frame. Then another shape stepped out of cell 7, and another from cell 11. Ragged silhouettes filling the corridor, their bodies shaking with unnatural tremors. Their mouths opened in slow, flickering gasps. Then they screamed, all at once. The sound shredded my ears. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head as blood seeped from one nostril. The lights above exploded, showering sparks. In the strobing darkness, the figures crawled toward me, arms bending in directions they weren't meant to bend. Jaws stretching too wide, fingers dragging on the floor like claws made of bone. I forced myself to move, crawling blindly down the corridor until my hand slammed against a cold steel door that hadn't been there seconds earlier. I pushed it open and tumbled inside. A single emergency light flickered overhead, bathing the room in sickly red. I realized where I was. The old guard control booth overlooking Block D. The glass was cracked, and through the cracks, I could see the corridor, except it wasn't filled with creatures anymore. It was empty, completely still, like nothing had ever been there. I stood there, shaking, trying to breathe. Then the intercom screeched. A deafening blast of static filled the booth. Through the static, a voice whispered, "You missed the count. We don't forget." Someone knocked on the control booth door. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath. The knock came again. Louder. Something scraped against the door. Long fingernails. Or bones. The emergency light flickered, and in the glass reflection, I saw a face behind me. Gray, hollow-eyed, mouth open wider than any human mouth should go. Screaming without sound. My vision blurred. My body seized. Everything went black. I woke up outside the prison, lying on the concrete near the ferry dock. My radio was shattered beside me. A ranger hovered over me, yelling that they'd found me unresponsive. I asked how long I'd been out. He said the alarms triggered around 3:10 a.m. when my badge registered me entering Block D. But the security footage showed something worse. It showed me walking into the block alone, but after 2:54 a.m., the cameras glitched. For 16 minutes, the feed turned completely black. When it came back, I was gone. Not leaving the block, not collapsing, gone. The last frame before the blackout shows the corridor of Block D, empty, quiet, until Cell 5 slowly opened by itself. A shape stepped toward the camera, tall, wrong, its mouth stretched in a silent scream. Then the feed cut out. I quit that same morning. I moved across the bay, but tonight, someone knocked on my apartment door. Soft, slow, deliberate. When I looked through the peephole, no one was there, just darkness. And from the other side of the door, I heard screaming. The same layered, impossible screaming from Block D. And I realized something. The count wasn't just incomplete, it was still going. And now, they know where I live. I didn't plan on going inside the abandoned E unit of the old Joliet Correctional Center. Hell, I didn't even know it existed. Most people only know Joliet from the Blues Brothers, or because it closed back in 2002, after more than a century of overcrowding, riots, and inmate deaths. The official tours only take you through the chapel, the yard, the main cell blocks. No one mentions E Unit. It's not on the map. But on a cold November afternoon, I wandered off from my group while taking photos for a college project. I'm not a ghost hunter, not a thrill seeker. I just needed pictures of historic decayed architecture. And Joliet practically sells itself. But when I rounded a corner near the laundry building, I noticed a narrow hallway blocked by yellowed tape and a rusted caution sign that had fallen over. The tape looked ancient, brittle, torn, the words, "restricted," barely visible. The hallway beyond was pitch black and freezing. I don't know why I walked in. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the strange humming sound I thought I heard from inside, like a low voice or breathing. The walls grew tighter. The farther I went, my footsteps echoed weirdly, like I was walking through a space much bigger than the hallway actually was. After about 30 feet, I hit a steel door with a plaque so rusted only one letter was readable. E. I pushed. It creaked open with a drawn-out groan that vibrated through my bones. The room behind it smelled like mold and metal. My phone light cut through the dust, illuminating rows of old solitary cells, tiny steel rooms meant for short-term punishment. Except every door was open. Every one except the last. Cell E13. Its door was sealed shut with a thick chain, padlocked tight. A faded paper tag hung from the top bar, fluttering slightly, though there was no breeze. I stepped closer and squinted at the tag. The writing was shaky, like someone scribbled it in a rush. Do not open. Unit closed after incident, 1974. I'd read about 1,974. Joliet had a riot that year, 2 inmates killed, several guards injured. But nothing in public record mentioned E Unit. As I leaned toward the door, something thudded from inside the cell, hard enough to rattle the chain. I froze. Then it thudded again, and again, slow, steady, like someone knocking. Hello? I whispered before thinking. The knocking stopped instantly. Silence spread so thick, it felt like cotton in my ears. I started backing away when my phone vibrated violently, buzzing like it was glitching. The screen flickered. The flashlight dimmed, then flared back to life, but everything looked off. The hallway behind me appeared longer than before. The cells seemed deeper, darker. And cell E13? Its chain was no longer tight. It hung loose, swaying. I hadn't touched it. Something inside had. Then the door eased open just a crack, enough to show nothing but pure black inside. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I didn't want to see more. But something climbed out of that crack, slowly, fingers first. They were too long, pale skin stretched tight over bone, nails broken and jagged. A whisper drifted out. Low, wet, count, incomplete. Another whisper followed, layered like multiple voices struggling to speak at once. Let me out. My legs finally reacted, and I stumbled backward. My foot caught on debris, and I crashed onto the cold floor, my phone skittering away with its light spinning wildly across the walls. For a split second, the beam illuminated something inside the cell eyes, milky white, glowing faintly like diseased pearls in the dark. The thing lunged. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the hallway stretching unnaturally long, like it was resisting me. The humming grew louder, turning into a deep, monstrous vibration. My ears popped as if the air itself was being sucked backward. The exit door I had entered through slammed shut just as I reached it. I slammed my shoulder into it again and again until it burst open and I tumbled into daylight. The humming stopped instantly. Silence, pure, heavy. I sprinted back to the tour group, gasping, filthy, shaking so hard one tourist thought I was hypothermic. I didn't say a word. I didn't look back. That night, I researched. I found a single archived newspaper clipping from 1974, mentioning an unidentified inmate death in a section of the prison that was no longer operational. No name, no details, just a line. Remains unrecovered after structural collapse. Area sealed, except E13 wasn't collapsed. And whatever was in there hadn't been unrecovered. It was waiting. 3 weeks later, I moved out of my apartment after a neighbor complained about screaming coming from inside when I wasn't home. I came back one night and found a long, pale handprint smeared on my bathroom mirror. Last week, a photo I took inside E-Unit synced itself to my cloud even though I deleted it months ago. The picture showed cell E13. The door was fully open, and behind the bars, two pale eyes stared straight at the camera. The caption, auto-generated by my phone, read, "Last viewed today."
I never believed the stories about Alcatraz being haunted. I thought people just liked turning old prisons into ghost attractions for tourists. But 3 months ago, when I took the last ferry tour of the day, something I only chose because the earlier slots were sold out, I realized some stories don't need your belief to be true. They just need you to walk into the wrong place at the wrong time. I stayed behind the group when we reached the cell block. I always liked exploring alone, and the guide talking about echoes of the past felt rehearsed. The air inside was colder than it should have been for San Francisco in July. I remember rubbing my hands together, annoyed at myself for not bringing a jacket. As I walked past the rows of rusting cells, I heard a metallic clang deep in the corridor. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like a cell door slamming shut in a hallway no one was supposed to be in. I assumed it was another tourist messing around, but when I looked behind me, the group was already far down the block, their audio guides glowing faintly. I should have caught up. I should have ignored it. Instead, I followed the sound. The further I walked, the more I felt something pulling me, an almost electrical pressure, like the air before a lightning strike. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the hallway was longer than it looked, Then I noticed a cell at the end of the row that wasn't on any tour map. Its bars weren't rusted like the others. They were darker, almost black, and the plaque beside it had been scratched so badly the letters were unreadable. But what bothered me more was that the cell door was slightly open, just enough that I could see darkness inside. Real darkness, not the kind that comes from a shadow or bad lighting. This was dense, like ink, like it wanted to swallow the light around it. I whispered, "Hello? Anyone there?" expecting no answer. But something whispered back. Not words, just breathing. Slow, wet, wrong. Every part of me screamed to run, but I stepped closer, my body moving before my mind. The smell hit me first, a mix of sea rot and old metal, like something had been trapped for decades without fresh air. My hand lifted toward the door, though I didn't remember choosing to move it. Inches before I touched the bars, a face appeared in the dark. Not rushing toward me, not jumping out to scare me, just slowly emerging from the blackness like it had been waiting and smiling. Its eyes didn't reflect light. Its skin looked stretched too tight, like it had been pulled over a skull that didn't match the shape of a human head. But the smile, that smile, is what froze me. It wasn't wide. It wasn't exaggerated. It was subtle, like a man grinning because he finally recognized someone he'd been looking for. I stumbled backward, heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The face stayed still, watching. Then the door creaked open another inch. Not from me, from inside. I turned to run, but when I looked down the hall, the exit was no longer there. The hallway stretched much farther than it had before, as if the building itself had changed. The lights flickered, and for a split second, every cell I had walked past appeared closed even though I hadn't touched them. And then I heard it. The breathing wasn't inside the cell anymore. It was behind me, right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Something primal inside me, older than fear, older than logic, told me that if I looked, I wouldn't leave this place, not as myself. My legs finally moved, and I sprinted down the distorted hallway, my footsteps slapping the concrete in frantic, uneven rhythms. The lighting overhead strobed like a heartbeat, flooding the corridor in pulses of white and shadow. Behind every flash, I caught glimpses, shapes leaning out of the cells, silhouettes pressed against the bars, mouths too wide, eyes too hollow. They weren't there in the light, only in the dark frames between. Halfway down the hallway, a siren wailed an old air raid style alarm that definitely wasn't used anymore. The sound vibrated through my ribs, rattling my teeth. My vision blurred, like the air itself was shaking. And then I saw them. Prison guards, or what looked like them, marching out from cross corridors that shouldn't exist. Their uniforms were from different decades, some from the 42nds, some from the 62nds, faces blank, eyes fogged over with milky white. They moved toward me in stiff, unnatural strides, batons dragging across the floor and leaving dark streaks behind them. When the nearest one lifted his baton, I saw that the streak wasn't dirt, it was blood. Fresh, still warm. "Stop running," a voice rasped from somewhere in the dark. It wasn't loud, but it drowned out the siren. "The count isn't finished." My legs buckled, and I crashed to the ground, scraping my palms. I forced myself up, lungs burning, but when I glanced back, the guards were gone, vanished like they'd never been there. The hallway suddenly shifted again, contracting, walls bending inward, until I felt like I was moving through the throat of some massive creature. My audio tour device crackled to life in my pocket. It had been silent the whole time. Now it played a grainy recording. In 1946, during the Battle of Alcatraz, several inmates disappeared during the chaos. Officially, records say they were killed or recaptured, but some bodies were never found. The device hissed, distorted, and a new voice replaced the narrator, a voice whispering directly into my ear. They weren't lost, they were moved. To the cell, not on the map. My stomach dropped. I didn't remember pressing play. I didn't even remember the device being on. Up ahead, the hallway ended at a door, a heavy steel one with peeling paint. A faint yellow light leaked from beneath it. I didn't think. I slammed through it. I found myself back in the main cell block, the real one. I could see tourists on the far end, taking pictures, completely unaware. My knees nearly gave out from relief. But something was wrong. The room was freezing colder than before, and the tourists, they weren't moving. They stood still, staring at me. Not blinking, not breathing. Slowly, in perfect unison, they all lifted their hands and pointed behind me. I felt the air shift, felt something tall unfold its limbs, felt breath slow, steady, hit the back of my neck. I turned. I shouldn't have. Standing inches away was the smiling face from the cell, except now I could see the rest of it. Its body was impossibly thin, like its bones had been rearranged. Its rib cage pressed against its skin like branches under a tarp. Its fingers were long enough to wrap twice around its own wrists. "Missing," it whispered, its jaw stretching with a soft crack. "Count." A cold hand slid around my wrist. Another gripped my shoulder. I was yanked backward with unnatural strength. The world blurred, twisting into a smear of steel bars and flickering lights. I screamed, but my voice made no sound. Everything collapsed into black. When I woke, I was lying on the dock near the last ferry, my clothes soaked with ocean spray, my throat raw, my palms bleeding. A ranger leaned over me, shouting for help. People rushed over. Flashlights, questions, chaos. But none of them asked the question I dreaded most. None of them asked where I had been, or who had brought me back. The ranger told me the prison had closed early that evening due to a power outage. No tours had gone inside after 4 p.m. There was no group for me to have followed, no corridor for me to have walked through, and definitely no unlisted cell. They checked the security cameras. Nothing. I wasn't on them at all, not entering, not leaving. The footage showed the cell block completely empty the whole evening. But the final clip recorded just before the system failed showed something else. Something standing in the corner of the cell block. Something tall, thin, smiling. Not moving, not breathing. Just watching the cameras. And in its hand was my audio tour device. I moved away a month ago. I won't step foot in San Francisco again. But this morning, a package was left on my porch with no return address. Inside was the device, my device. The screen was cracked, but it turned on. Only one audio file was saved, a recording of my own voice, whispering words I don't remember saying. The count isn't finished.
If you want more stories based on real American locations and true horror accounts, make sure to subscribe. It helps the channel reach more listeners and lets me keep digging into cases like this. Drop a comment on which place you want me to investigate next. Thanks for listening, and stay safe tonight.